Captain Maris Kellen of the Androsian species stood on the bridge of the Galactic Alliance survey vessel, Aurora, her elongated cranium reflecting the soft blue light from the holographic displays surrounding her command chair. The vast expanse of uncharted space stretched before them, a tapestry of distant stars and cosmic phenomena that had remained unexplored since the establishment of the Galactic Alliance era. Her crew of 25 scientists and engineers from various species worked diligently at their stations, their mission clear: to survey the desolate regions of space for any remaining signs of life on planets previously classified as Deathworlds. The Aurora hummed with the gentle vibration of its quantum drives as they approached the Outer Rim territories, a region known for its harsh celestial bodies and dangerous gravitational anomalies. Their current destination was a planet designated Glacia 9, a frozen wasteland that had been classified as a Category 6 Deathworld over 3 centuries ago. The classification meant that the planet's environment was considered so hostile that no known form of life could survive on its surface. Yet here they were following routine protocols to verify that classification and gather any scientific data that might prove valuable to the Alliance's ever-expanding database of galactic knowledge. Dr. Luma Yuan, the chief military scientist aboard the Aurora, looked up from her console with an expression of puzzlement crossing her reptilian features. "Captain, I'm detecting something unusual," she announced, her voice carrying the precise diction typical of her species. "We're receiving a signal on an ancient frequency band." Maris turned her attention to the main screen as Dr. Yuan transferred the readings to the bridge displays. The waveform pattern appeared erratic, but there was an unmistakable structure to it that suggested intelligent origin. "Can you clean it up, determine its source?" "Working on it now, Captain." Dr. Yuan's clawed fingers danced across her console with practiced efficiency. After several minutes of signal enhancement and background noise reduction, she nodded with satisfaction. "It's an SOS signal, Captain. But this frequency hasn't been used in over 300 years. It's originating from Glacia 9. The bridge fell silent, except for the ambient sounds of the ship's systems. An SOS from a Deathworld was unprecedented. According to all records, Glacia 9 had been surveyed only once before its classification, and that expedition had confirmed the complete absence of any life forms capable of survival in its extreme environment. Lieutenant Rincaro, the Aurora's security chief, stepped forward from his post. His species' natural caution was evident in his posture as he addressed the captain. "Captain, our protocols specifically prohibit approaching Deathworlds without proper authorization from Alliance Command. Perhaps we should report this discovery and await instructions." Maris considered his words carefully. The protocols existed for good reason. Deathworlds had earned their classification through tragedy, often claiming the lives of entire exploration crews. Yet the very existence of an SOS signal suggested that someone somehow had managed to survive on Glacia 9. As a captain of the Galactic Alliance, she had a duty to investigate any potential signs of life, especially distress signals. "Set course for Glacia 9, she commanded, her decision firm. "If there's even a possibility that someone is alive on that planet, we have an obligation to investigate. Alert all departments. I want full spectrum analysis of the planet as we approach." Sergeant Heck Vorn, the ship's senior pilot, acknowledged the order and adjusted their trajectory. His tentacled appendages moved with fluid precision across the navigation controls as the Aurora changed course toward the distant world. "ETA to Glacia 9 orbit 14 hours, Captain." As the Aurora traveled through hyperspace toward its destination, the crew worked tirelessly to analyze every piece of data they could gather about Glacia 9. The original survey records from 3 centuries ago painted a picture of a world caught in the grip of an eternal ice age, with surface temperatures averaging -60 degrees Celsius and frequent radiation storms that would be lethal to most known species. Dr. Yuan spent hours studying the SOS signal, attempting to decode any additional information it might contain. The frequency was indeed ancient, but the signal itself showed signs of regular maintenance and broadcasting. This suggested that whatever was generating it had been actively maintained for possibly centuries. Lieutenant Caro coordinated with his security team to prepare for various scenarios they might encounter upon arrival. His species had evolved from predators, and his instincts told him that something was not right about this situation. Deathworlds were abandoned for a reason, and the sudden appearance of a distress signal after 300 years of silence seemed too convenient to be mere coincidence. As the Aurora dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Glacia 9 system, the sensors immediately began painting a picture that defied their expectations. The planet itself appeared much as described in the ancient records, a frozen ball of ice and rock, with an atmosphere too thin and toxic to support most forms of life. However, orbital sensors detected something that made the entire bridge crew freeze in amazement. "Captain," Dr. Yuan called out, her voice barely containing her excitement. "I'm reading massive infrastructure in orbit around Glacia 9. This isn't primitive or archaeological. These are contemporary military installations." The main screen flickered to life, displaying a detailed scan of the planet's orbital space. Massive space stations dotted the area around Glacia 9, their designs unlike anything in the Galactic Alliance database. The structures were angular and utilitarian, bristling with what appeared to be weapon systems and defensive shields. "How is this possible?" Maris whispered more to herself than to her crew. The planet was surveyed 300 years ago. There was no mention of any advanced civilizations or infrastructure. Before anyone could respond, the ship's proximity, alarms began wailing. Sergeant Vorn's tentacles flew across his console as he tried to identify the source of the alert. "Captain, multiple contacts approaching from the planet's surface. I count 12 vessels, configuration unknown, but they're armed and moving fast." The tactical display showed a formation of sleek, predatory-looking ships rising from Glacia 9's atmosphere. Unlike the Aurora's smooth diplomatic design, these vessels appeared built for war with armored hulls and visible weapon ports that gave them a menacing appearance. "Red alert," Maris commanded. "All hands to battle stations. Communications attempt to hail the approaching vessels." The Aurora's communications officer, a young Zephyrian named Jel Thren, established an open channel. "Unknown vessels. This is the Galactic Alliance survey ship Aurora. We are responding to a distress signal from this system. Please identify yourselves." The response came immediately broadcast on a channel that overrode their communication systems with brute force. The voice that emerged was deep and commanding, with an accent that suggested it belonged to a species not documented in Alliance records. "Alliance vessel, you are in violation of Deathworlder sovereignty. I am Admiral Jarvan of the Glacia Defense Fleet. You will cease your approach immediately and prepare to be escorted away from this system." Captain Maris felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Deathworlders. She had heard whispers of them in the furthest reaches of Alliance space, but they were considered more legend than fact. Stories spoke of humans who had survived on worlds classified as uninhabitable, who had not only endured, but thrived in environments that would kill most species within hours. Admiral Jarvan," Maris replied, keeping her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We detected an SOS signal originating from this system. As members of the Galactic Alliance, we are obligated to investigate any distress calls. We mean no harm and seek only to render assistance if needed." A harsh laugh echoed through the communications channel. "SOS signal, that old training beacon. It's been broadcasting for over 300 years. We keep it running as a memorial, not a cry for help. You've made a grave mistake coming here, Alliance Captain. Glacia 9 is under our protection, and we do not take kindly to uninvited guests." The implication of Admiral Jarvan's words hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. The SOS signal they had risked everything to investigate was nothing more than an old training beacon, a memorial to some long-forgotten event. They had violated Alliance protocols and entered Deathworlder space based on a misunderstanding that was 3 centuries old. Dr. Yuan's scaled hands trembled slightly as she ran additional scans of the approaching vessels. Captain, I'm detecting massive energy buildups in their weapon systems. Their technology is impressive. These aren't primitive ships. Lieutenant Caro stepped closer to the captain's chair, his voice low and urgent. Captain, we need to consider our options. These ships outgun us significantly. If it comes to a fight, we won't last long. Maris nodded grimly. The Aurora was designed for exploration and scientific research, not military engagement. While it carried defensive systems, it was no match for what appeared to be a dedicated war fleet. She had to find a way to defuse this situation before it escalated beyond the point of no return. Admiral Jarvan, she called out, we apologize for the misunderstanding. We were not aware that this system was inhabited or under any form of protection. If you'll allow us to withdraw, we can report back to Alliance Command and arrange for proper diplomatic channels to be established. It's too late for diplomacy, Admiral Jarvan's voice boomed through the bridge. You've seen our installations, our defenses. You know we exist now. We cannot allow you to simply leave and report our location to your alliance. Prepare to be boarded or face the consequences. The Deathworlder ships had completed their approach and now surrounded the Aurora in a perfect tactical formation. Escape was impossible. Even if they could break through the enemy lines, the Aurora was no match for the speed and firepower of the vessels that hunted them. Maris looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. Each of them had families, dreams, lives that extended far beyond this moment. As their captain, she bore the responsibility for their survival. But she also represented the Galactic Alliance, and backing down now would be seen as a sign of weakness that could have repercussions throughout known space. Dr. Yuan, she said quietly, what can you tell me about their weapons? They're using enhanced plasma cannons, Captain. Much more powerful than anything in our database. Their shields are also significantly stronger than ours. In a direct confrontation, our odds of survival are... She paused, not wanting to vocalize what everyone already knew. Negligible, Maris finished for her. I understand. Before she could consider her options further, the space around the Aurora erupted in brilliant flashes of light. The Deathworlder ships had opened fire, but not directly at them. The plasma bolts streaked past the Aurora's hull, missing by mere meters, their heat signatures detectable, even through the ship's shielding. Warning shots. Sergeant Vorn reported unnecessarily. Every person on the bridge had felt the Aurora shudder as the energy weapons passed close enough to interfere with their own systems. Admiral Jarvan's voice returned colder than the vacuum of space itself. That was your only warning, Alliance Captain. Lower your shields and prepare to receive our boarding parties, or the next volley will not miss. Captain Maris stood slowly, her decision crystallizing in her mind. She could fight. Use the Aurora's limited weapons to try to break through the Deathworlder lines. It would be a futile gesture that would likely result in the death of everyone aboard her ship. Or she could surrender hope that these mysterious Deathworlders would be reasonable once they understood the full scope of the misunderstanding. There was, however, a third option. Admiral Jarvan. She began her voice, carrying all the authority she had cultivated over years of command. I propose a different solution. Grant me 5 minutes to explain our situation fully, to share our records of why we came here. If after hearing what I have to say you still believe we pose a threat, I will order my crew to stand down completely. Silence stretched across the channel for what felt like an eternity. The bridge of the Aurora was so quiet that the humming of the ship's life support systems seemed deafeningly loud. Finally, Admiral Jarvan responded. You have 3 minutes, Alliance Captain. Choose your words carefully. Maris took a deep breath and began. 300 years ago, your ancestors sent out a signal on an ancient frequency, a distress beacon, or what we interpreted as one. The signal has been broadcasting continuously since then. Our records show that Glacia 9 was classified as a death world after a single survey with no mention of any intelligent life. She paused, gathering her thoughts. We are explorers, Admiral. Scientists and researchers whose mission is to catalog and understand the galaxy around us. When we detected that ancient signal still broadcasting, after all these centuries, we believed we might find survivors in need of rescue. We violated our own protocols not out of aggression or conquest, but because we could not ignore what we thought was a cry for help. Dr. Yuan, understanding what her captain was attempting, stepped forward. Admiral, I can transmit our complete survey records, our mission parameters, even our personal logs. You'll see that this vessel carries no weapons of conquest, no military personnel beyond standard security. We are scientists, not soldiers. Lieutenant Caro added, our defensive capabilities are minimal compared to your vessels. If we had intended aggression, we would hardly have come alone and underarmed. Another long silence followed, before Admiral Jarvan spoke again, his tone slightly less hostile than before. Your story is interesting, Alliance Captain. We are aware of your presence in our space, of course. We've been monitoring your approach since you entered the system. Our scans confirm that your vessel matches your description, primarily scientific equipment with minimal military systems. Maris felt a spark of hope. Admiral, we represent the Galactic Alliance, an organization dedicated to peaceful exploration and cooperation between species. We had no knowledge of your people's existence or your claim to this system. Surely we can find a peaceful resolution to this situation. A new voice joined the channel, speaking in the same language, but with a different accent. Admiral Jarvan, I've completed analysis of their transmission data. Their records appear authentic. This ship launched from Alliance space 6 months ago, with a scientific mandate. No military escort, no weapons beyond standard defensive systems. Admiral Jarvan seemed to consider this information. Captain Maris, you claim ignorance of our existence. Yet your alliance has explored this region of space before. How do you explain the lack of contact? Admiral, Dr. Yuan interjected. Our records show that the original survey of Glacia 9 was conducted over 300 years ago, during the early expansion period of what would become the Galactic Alliance. The survey team categorized the planet as uninhabitable and moved on. There was no indication of any indigenous intelligence or established colonies. Because, Admiral Jarvan replied, with something that might have been amusement, 300 years ago we were hiding. Your survey team landed on our planet, in the middle of what we call the Long Winter War. They arrived just as our ancestors were fighting to establish the first permanent settlements. The survey team saw a frozen wasteland, because that's exactly what we wanted them to see. The revelation hit the bridge crew like a physical impact. The implications were staggering. An entire civilization had been concealing itself from the Galactic Alliance for 3 centuries, developing in isolation on a world considered too hostile for life. Maris found her voice first. You've been here for 300 years. Your people survived on a Class 6 death world. Survived, Captain, we thrived. There was unmistakable pride in Admiral Jarvan's voice. Glacia 9 forged us into something stronger than your Alliance worlds could imagine. We adapted, evolved, built a civilization that could not only endure this world's challenges, but harness them. Sergeant Vorn spoke up tentatively. Admiral, the signal we detected. You called it a training beacon. Indeed. 300 years ago, our ancestors established that beacon as part of their emergency protocols. Over time, it became a memorial to those who died in the Long Winter War. We maintained it as a reminder of how far we've come, how much we've endured. We had no idea it was still broadcasting on frequencies your alliance could detect. Captain Maris felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. So, when our ancestors first visited, they saw only a primitive signal from a dying world. They classified Glacia 9 as a death world, and moved on, never realizing they had encountered the early stages of a thriving civilization. Precisely. And now, 3 centuries later, you arrive investigating what you believe is a distress call only to find a fully developed society that has been deliberately avoiding contact with your alliance. The tension in the air was palpable, but it had shifted from the threat of immediate violence to the uncertainty of first contact with an unknown civilization. Dr. Yuan stepped closer to the communications console. "Admiral, may I ask why your people chose isolation? The Galactic Alliance promotes cooperation and knowledge sharing between species." Admiral Jarvan's reply carried a hint of ancient bitterness. "Because, Doctor, we learned long ago that cooperation often means subjugation for the weaker partner. Your alliance may preach equality, but we've observed your expansion over the centuries. How many primitive civilizations have been uplifted by your alliance? How many have retained their true independence?" Lieutenant Caro exchanged glances with Captain Maris. The Admiral's words touched on a sensitive subject within alliance politics: the ongoing debate about the ethics of intervention and uplift protocols for less technologically advanced species. "I understand your concerns, Admiral," Maris replied carefully. "But I hope you'll consider that our presence here today proves that the Alliance doesn't simply conquer or absorb every world it encounters. We came here believing we were answering a distress call. We could have approached with a military fleet if our intentions were hostile." "A fair point," Admiral Jarvan acknowledged. "But now we face a dilemma. You know of our existence, our location, our capabilities. We cannot simply allow you to return to your alliance with this information without some form of arrangement." The bridge fell silent as everyone contemplated the implications. They had sought to answer an ancient distress call, and instead had stumbled into a first contact situation with a militaristic civilization that had been hiding from the galaxy for 3 centuries. Dr. Yuan cleared her throat. "Admiral, perhaps we could discuss the possibility of formal diplomatic contact. The Alliance has protocols for precisely this type of situation. We could establish a neutral ground for negotiations, work out terms for future contact that respect your people's sovereignty while allowing for beneficial exchange." "Diplomatic contact," Admiral Jarvan mused. "An interesting proposition. Tell me, Doctor, what would your alliance want from us? Our technology, our resources, our strategic location." "Knowledge," Captain Maris interjected firmly. "The alliance is fundamentally dedicated to the advancement of science and understanding. The fact that your people have not only survived, but apparently flourished on a death world, represents a tremendous advancement in adaptation and survival technology. But more than that, you represent a unique perspective, a different path of development that could benefit all species. And in return," Admiral Jarvan's tone was cautious. "Partnership," Maris replied, without hesitation. "The Alliance offers protection trade opportunities access to a vast network of knowledge and resources. But it also respects sovereignty. You would not be forced to join or conform to Alliance standards. You would remain independent, free to choose your level of involvement." Another voice joined the conversation from the Deathworlder ships. "Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting movement in the outer system. Additional Alliance vessels are approaching." Captain Maris felt her heart sink. "Admiral, I can explain." "It appears your alliance has sent reinforcements." Admiral Jarvan's voice had turned cold again. "So much for coming alone with peaceful intentions." "No, Admiral, you don't understand. Those aren't reinforcements. Standard protocol requires that any ship failing to report in at scheduled intervals triggers an automatic search and rescue operation. I'm overdue for my next report. My crew's families will have been notified that we're missing." Dr. Yuan quickly accessed the ship's communications logs. "Captain, the Admiral is correct. I'm reading 3 Alliance vessels on approach. Scout-class ships, probably a search and rescue squadron." Sergeant Vorn added, "They'll arrive in approximately 6 hours, Captain." The situation had just become exponentially more complicated. What had started as a misunderstood distress call had now evolved into a potential military incident between the Galactic Alliance and a previously unknown civilization. Admiral Jarvan's voice cut through the bridge's tense atmosphere. "Captain Maris, this changes everything. What was an isolated incident is now a potential confrontation between our respective forces. How do you propose we resolve this?" Maris thought quickly. The approaching ships meant that the situation was spiraling beyond her control. Soon, Alliance Command would know about the Deathworlders, whether she reported it or not. The question was how to manage this revelation in a way that prevented it from becoming a catastrophe. Admiral, I propose we use this time to establish the framework for formal first contact. When the Alliance ships arrive, we present them with a fait accompli. Initial diplomatic contact has been established, terms are being negotiated in good faith. This way, we control the narrative and the pace of engagement. An intriguing proposal, Admiral Jarvan admitted. But how do we ensure your alliance doesn't simply attempt to negotiate from a position of strength? These rescue ships will see our defenses, our numbers. They might decide that military pressure is more effective than diplomacy. Lieutenant Caro spoke up. Admiral, the captains of those incoming ships are likely operating under search and rescue protocols. Their primary concern will be the safety of our crew. If Captain Maris is able to report in to confirm that we're safe and engaged in formal diplomatic contact, they're more likely to maintain distance and await orders from Alliance Command. And those orders? Admiral Jarvan inquired. Captain Maris considered carefully. Given the unprecedented nature of this situation, Alliance Command will almost certainly establish a formal diplomatic mission. The Alliance has extensive protocols for first contact situations. The fact that we've made initial contact safely will weigh heavily in favor of peaceful resolution. Dr. Yuan added, Admiral, this actually represents an opportunity for your people. Controlled contact on your terms, rather than eventual discovery on theirs. The Alliance's expansion is vast but slow. Eventually, exploration missions would have reached this system regardless. This way you maintain agency in how contact proceeds. Admiral Jarvan was quiet for several minutes, presumably consulting with his command staff. When he spoke again, there was a note of decision in his voice. Very well, Captain Maris. We will attempt this diplomatic approach. But understand, any sign of treachery, any indication that your alliance seeks to exploit this situation, and we will respond accordingly. Understood, Admiral. With your permission, I'd like to transmit a message to the approaching Alliance vessels, confirming our safety and the nature of our current situation. Permission granted. But Captain, the message will be transmitted through our communication systems. We will monitor every word. Of course. Sergeant Vorn, prepare a coded transmission using Alliance diplomatic protocols. Code 7 Alpha, first contact scenario, all parties safe negotiations in progress. As Vorn worked to encode the message, Dr. Yuan studied the data they had gathered about the Deathworlder ships and installations. Captain, their technology is remarkable. These ships show design philosophies I've never encountered. They've clearly developed along a completely different technological path than Alliance species. A path forged by necessity, a new voice interjected. The communication channel had expanded to include additional members of Admiral Jarvan's command staff. I am Engineer Prime Cole Darren. Your doctor is correct. Our technology developed in isolation driven by the need to survive in an environment that would kill most species within hours. Engineer Prime. Dr. Yuan responded eagerly. I'd be fascinated to learn about your adaptation techniques. The scientific implications alone. Easy, Doctor, Captain Maris cautioned gently. Let's establish diplomatic relations first. Scientific exchange can follow. Admiral Jarvan's voice returned to the channel. Your message has been transmitted, Captain. The approaching vessels have acknowledged receipt and are reducing speed. It appears your alliance may be more reasonable than our paranoia suggested. Over the following hours, the Aurora remained under escort by the Deathworlder fleet as preliminary negotiations began. Captain Maris found herself in constant communication with Admiral Jarvan and his advisors, working to establish the basic framework for formal contact between their civilizations. The more she learned about the Deathworlders, the more impressed she became. These were not primitive survivalists clinging to life on a hostile world. They had built a sophisticated civilization that had turned the challenges of their environment into strengths. Their technology was different from Alliance standard, but in many ways superior, particularly in areas related to environmental adaptation and resource efficiency. Dr. Yuan had been granted permission to exchange basic scientific data with engineer Prime Darren, and the results were nothing short of revolutionary. The Deathworlders had developed fusion technologies that were decades ahead of Alliance science, along with biotechnology that could potentially transform how species adapted to hostile environments. Lieutenant Caro found common ground with the Deathworlder military liaison, a stern figure known only as War Coordinator Thek. Despite the initial tension, both officers shared the professional respect of dedicated military personnel, and their conversations gradually revealed the sophisticated strategic thinking behind Deathworlder defense planning. As the Alliance rescue ships approached the outer system, Admiral Jarvan made an unprecedented decision. Captain Maris, I am inviting a small delegation from your crew to visit our primary orbital facility. This gesture of trust should demonstrate to your approaching colleagues that we are committed to peaceful resolution. Maris was stunned. Admiral, that's an extraordinary offer. I accept on behalf of the Alliance. Dr. Yuan, Lieutenant Caro, you'll accompany me. Captain, Sergeant Vorn called out, the lead Alliance ship is requesting direct communication. Put them through, Maris ordered. A familiar voice filled the bridge. Aurora, this is Captain Jace Meridian of the Alliance vessel Hermes. We're on a search and rescue mission. Report your status immediately. Captain Meridian, this is Captain Maris. Aurora is secure, all crew safe. We are currently engaged in formal first contact negotiations with the inhabitants of the Glacia 9 system. I repeat, formal first contact has been established. The pause that followed was telling. First contact was every Alliance officer's dream, the opportunity to represent their civilization in the historic moment when two species met for the first time. Understood, Aurora. My orders are to verify your safety and establish a communication relay with Alliance Command. Is the local population cooperative? Admiral Jarvan's voice cut into the channel, smooth and diplomatic. Captain Meridian, I am Admiral Jarvan of the Glacia Defense Fleet. Your colleague Captain Maris has conducted herself with admirable professionalism. We welcome the opportunity to establish formal relations with your galactic alliance. Captain Meridian's surprise was evident in his voice. Admiral Jarvan, this is unexpected. My understanding was that Glacia 9 was classified as uninhabited. A classification that suited our purposes for 3 centuries, Captain. Times change, as do circumstances. We have agreed to host a small diplomatic delegation from Captain Maris's crew aboard our primary orbital facility. Perhaps you would care to observe these historic proceedings. Over the next several hours, what had begun as a potentially tragic misunderstanding transformed into a carefully orchestrated first contact scenario. The Alliance rescue ships maintained a respectful distance, while Captain Maris, Dr. Yuan, and Lieutenant Caro transferred to a Deathworlder shuttle for the short journey to the orbital facility. The station they visited was a marvel of engineering, a massive structure that somehow managed to be both brutally functional and aesthetically pleasing. The Deathworlders who greeted them were humanoid, but showed clear signs of adaptation to their harsh environment. Enhanced circulatory systems to deal with extreme cold, modified bone density, to handle variable gravity, and respiratory systems that could extract oxygen from atmospheres too thin for most species. Admiral Jarvan met them personally, a tall figure in military uniform that somehow conveyed both authority and approachability. Welcome aboard Fortress Station Meridian, he said, with what might have been humor. Named coincidentally for the same astronomical feature as your arriving captain's ship. The station tour revealed the extent of Deathworlder achievement. They had not merely survived on Glacia 9. They had created a civilization that had turned the planet's hostile environment into a strategic advantage. The extreme cold was harnessed for industrial processes. The radiation storms had been channeled into energy generation, and the low gravity had allowed for construction techniques impossible on standard worlds. Dr. Yuan could barely contain her excitement as Engineer Prime Darren explained their fusion technology. The key, Darren explained, was abandoning the assumption that we needed to create Earth-like conditions for our technology to function. Instead, we designed systems that thrived in our environment. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Caro was deep in discussion with War Coordinator Thek about defensive strategies. "Your orbital defenses are remarkable," Caro admitted. "I've never seen weapons that could channel planetary radiation as an energy source." "When you live on a death world," Thek replied grimly, "every aspect of your environment becomes a potential weapon." As the day progressed, the framework for formal diplomatic relations began to take shape. The Deathworlders would establish a permanent embassy aboard a neutral station in Alliance space, while the Alliance would be permitted to maintain a small research facility on the outskirts of the Glacia 9 system. Trade agreements were outlined that would benefit both civilizations. The Alliance would gain access to unique Deathworlder technology and perspectives, while the Deathworlders would have access to the vast network of resources and knowledge that comes with Alliance membership. Most importantly, the Deathworlders would maintain complete sovereignty over their territory and their people. They would choose their level of involvement with the Alliance, participating in joint ventures and knowledge exchange without being subsumed into the larger organization. Admiral Jarvan and Captain Maris found themselves in private discussion as the formal negotiations wound down. "Captain," the Admiral said thoughtfully, "I find myself wondering what would have happened if you had followed your protocols, if you had reported the signal and waited for authorization before investigating." Maris considered the question. "Honestly, Admiral, I don't know. Bureaucracy moves slowly in the Alliance. It might have been months or years before an authorized expedition was approved. And it would likely have been a larger, more military force given that it was a death world. And instead we get a confused science vessel, a 300-year-old mistake, and the beginning of what I hope will be a beneficial relationship between our peoples." "Sometimes," Maris mused, "the best diplomatic outcomes come from the most unexpected circumstances." As the Aurora prepared to depart Glacia 9 space, carrying with it news of the most significant first contact in recent Alliance history, both Captain Maris and Admiral Jarvan reflected on how a simple misunderstanding had opened the door to a new chapter in galactic relations. The SOS signal continued to broadcast from Glacia 9, no longer a memorial to past struggles, but a beacon pointing toward future cooperation. What had been interpreted as a cry for help from a dying world was revealed to be something far more significant. A bridge between civilizations spanning 3 centuries and built on the foundation of mutual respect and understanding. In the end, the mistake that had brought them together, the ancient signal, the misunderstood classification, the violation of protocols, had become the catalyst for something greater than anyone involved could have imagined. The Deathworlders had emerged from their self-imposed isolation, not as conquerors or threats, but as potential partners in the great adventure of galactic exploration and cooperation. As the Aurora departed, escorted part of the way by an honor guard of Deathworlder ships, Captain Maris composed her official report. She wrote of a civilization that had turned adversity into strength, isolation into independence, and potential conflict into opportunity. She wrote of people who had looked at a world that would kill most species and seen not a death sentence, but a home. Most importantly, she wrote of the lesson that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from following protocols and procedures, but from listening to distress calls that turn out to be something else entirely. Unexpected invitations to expanded understanding, cooperation, and hope for the future. The galaxy had become a larger, more complex and infinitely more interesting place. And it had all started with a 300-year-old mistake that no one had bothered to investigate, until a curious science vessel led by a captain willing to bend the rules decided to see what was really broadcasting from the edge of known space. The SOS had been a mistake, but the response to it had been exactly what the galaxy needed. A reminder that in the vast expanse of space, no call for help, no matter how old or misunderstood, should ever go unanswered.